Hello, everybody. Glass Half Dead here, and today with me I have Alex, that side, from Kill Team Academy. You may remember him from, it's been a while now, a good 6 months ago, I think,
Yeah.
where we spoke to both him and Elliot. I think at the time he was not the winner of like every tournament, but now he is. But today we have Alex back because Alex, you created the BAO Tournament Pack, which is Bay Area Open Tournament Pack. Is that its official name, actually?
uh, for now, I mean, it's some version of it. I'm sure will be the LVO
Okay.
pack as
And then
well.
it will be
So
called the
yeah, it's
LVO Pack.
yeah, and then
Okay.
maybe with the cooperation of many other tournament organizers, it'll eventually be a sort of a ITC format or something like that
Okay.
with
So,
major changes.
so today we're going to talk about kind of why you decided to make a tournament pack,
hmm
what went into it, why you made the decisions you made, because obviously any tournament pack has to have a certain
Yeah.
level of custom rules.
hmm
Um, yeah, and just really because obviously this whole week I've been doing a whole thing about
Yeah.
competitive kill team and
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
people being open to their own community rules and custom
Yeah.
rules to a degree.
Yeah.
So I thought, why not
Yeah.
bring on someone that has done the process? So I think a good place to start is what is the BAO rule pack? How does it differ from regular Annihilation or just straight out of the
Right.
book kill team?
So the way that it worked at BAO, now I'm kind of hesitant to talk about it in the present tense because it's definitely going to be changing, especially after BAO and all of these other things that have come up. Um, for BAO specifically, it basically in terms of the differences from it was based originally off of like the no last year's Nova and then the Annihilation tournament pack. And then when Arena
Oh,
came out,
just to
which
quickly
was a
jump in,
continuation of that.
the Annihilation Tournament Pack, for anyone that doesn't know, is the one that Games Workshop originally released for their own tournament, right?
Right, but that was after Nova.
Okay, so we had
So
Nova,
they
then we had
originally did
Annihilation.
it for Nova, and then they kind of tweaked it a tiny bit for Annihilation, but it was basically the same.
Okay, keep going.
So actually, I can actually start at the beginning of how this all came about, which started with LVO. Um, essentially, when me and Elliot were before LVO, when we were planning that Kill Team tournament, the advertisement for Arena was released, and we were like, "Oh, this is crazy! This is awesome! We're doing competitive kill team tournament, and now we're going to have these competitive kill team rules." But we didn't really know that much about it. We also didn't know when it was going to come out, and so we were in this limbo world of not knowing if we are going to use anything from it, if it's going to come out in time, and all that kind of stuff. I think it ended up coming out about a week before LVO, and the main issue was that we were using frontline gaming terrain, which was obviously not Arena, and we didn't know if Arena was going to have the capacity to be used with non-Arena terrain. And so that was kind of the main question that was plaguing us leading up to LVO. It worked out fine because we ended up just going with the Annihilation pack, basically, and Kill Team Arena didn't come out till like the week before or something like that. And but we did find out that it actually, at the time, we thought, because we only had a very short amount of time to kind of look through it, that it didn't really have all of the missions seemed to be designed specifically for the different arena kill zones. And so as a result, we kind of put it aside, especially for LVO, and thought, okay, that'll be something, that we can do in the future, which is when immediately after LVO, I started thinking about using Arena for the BAO. Once I was able to get the frontline gaming guys to agree to having a kill team tournament at BAO. And so because of that kind of speedy look through of the kill team book, for before LVO, and sort of trying to have a vague idea of what it was about, that kind of affected how I went about planning for BAO, in the sense that I didn't. It was a little bit of a mistake, admittedly, but I didn't necessarily go back into the arena book with a fine-tooth comb and be like, okay, is there a way to use these missions with non-arena terrain? And recently, after BAO, I have been going through the arena book and with different things that Mike Brandt has said on Facebook and things like that. The Arena Ultima missions do actually work quite well with non-arena terrain, and I know it's kind of interesting because they haven't been. I'll get back to BAO in a second. I'm just sort of giving you the preface of how this all came about. And so after BAO, since I've been doing more of the playtesting, practicing with those Ultima missions on non-arena terrain, I've realized that they are actually pretty well balanced and work just fine in non-arena terrain. Now, before that, when I was under the impression that that wasn't an option, that all of the options for arena were like specifically for those arena kill zones, and you could only use them with those setups, because the competitive play missions in the book do basically require you to have those kill zones, because they have the zones of control and things like that. Whereas 3 or 4 pages from the back of the arena rulebook, the sort of random Ultima missions. Actually, here I can show you them. These, where it sort of gets you to randomly generate them, they have exactly 5 objectives for each mission, and they, with the right different measurements and everything, they do work with non-arena terrain. So I actually didn't really have because of the impression that I'd gotten before LVO, I basically hadn't thought of using those for non-arena terrain. And so in lieu of that, I knew that I wanted to run a tournament that used both non-arena and arena terrain, because I didn't have a huge number of arena boards to use for BAO. And Kill Team Stream Sheldon was gracious enough to supply his arena boards for that tournament. So basically what I ended up doing was going through each of the arena kill zones and figuring out which areas you could put objectives that would literally work for all 4 arena kill zones. And so for example, none of the missions that I used for BAO had an objective in the dead center of the map, because one of the arena kill zones blocked that out, and you just couldn't put an objective there. And so that, and then the allowing all 18 secondary objectives for BAO was it was a back and forth in terms of coming to that decision. I'm actually leaning towards not doing that in the future, not necessarily because it destroys the game or anything like that, but talking to and working with kind of very competitive players, it can, and then after actually playing the Ultima missions more, I'm realizing that they do work very well. But if you allow all 18 secondary objectives, they might not, because some of them are so obvious for a horde team or an elite team to take, and they would just take those same secondary objectives every single time and max them out every single time. That it kind of it makes it easier for more experienced players, but harder for less experienced players, I guess. In the sense that if you know exactly the best secondary objectives to take, and you're allowed to take them every single game, you're just going to do that. And if the other player isn't that as experienced as you, it widens that gap between which some people like, and that's fine. But yeah. So basically, so the pack that was used at BAO was essentially these missions that I created that had the objectives laid out in a way that they all 6 missions worked for every arena kill zone and non-arena terrain. That was kind of the main goal when I was making them. And then I wanted to make them have some kind of fun narrative aspect that differentiates each mission. So that's when I added the bonus mission objectives. Now, whether this is a perfectly balanced system, it's probably not, because it didn't go through all of the testing that the Arena and Ultima missions did. But in terms of sort of on the fly, I guess, trying to make it work just for that tournament, for mixing arena and non-arena terrain, that was basically why I came up with that. And the feedback about using all 18 secondary objectives was mixed, and so I probably won't be doing that going forward. And I'm actually right now, especially with Nova coming up, and then probably using the Ultima missions and all that kind of stuff, I am working on a new pack that actually shows the measurements from those Ultima missions in a similar way to the way that the so this is essentially what the BAO mission pack looked like. Like, that's what the deployment zones and mission objectives look like. And so I'm making a version of that that can be used for arena or non-arena, with the Ultima missions and their mission objectives and everything. So
Okay,
yeah.
cool. So you mentioned quite a bit there. I took a few notes. Um, but I suppose let's dive into the big question, okay? Which it
Yeah.
might sound harsh, but but
I think I know what it
as
is.
you said, you hadn't realised that the Ultimate missions were quite as flexible as they originally seemed. You thought they could only be used
Right.
for arena.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to back up. Let's just very
Okay.
quickly define your tournament pack. So you
Right.
alternate every round between a open play, whatever you're calling it, an open board,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
standard core board where you place terrain on it, and then
Right.
and then the next round you will play inside an arena.
Right.
Yeah, an
Yeah.
arena match. It was at the time 100 points, and it
Yes.
was using elites because
Yes.
elites had just released the week before, hadn't it?
Right. And that it
Okay.
was funny. I ended up being in a very similar position to LVO when Arena was announced. That we kind of just didn't know if it was going to work, if it was going to come out in time for the tournament and all that kind of stuff. But I think it ended up working out pretty well with elites, because I think
Definitely, yeah.
it gave us a good 2 weeks, before
Mm.
BAO.
And then secondaries, as you said, so there were 18 in total. And
Yes.
unlike in the Arena book, which I hope most people know, where you are limited to 5 of the default ones, and then each map will have its own special
Right.
secondary,
Yeah.
like activate engines or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
You gave everybody access to the full 18
Right.
every round.
Yeah.
What about primary objectives? Was it the same every time? 5 objectives like
Yes.
Ultima? Okay.
Well, except in the missions that I created, it was not always 5 objectives. Sometimes it was 6, sometimes it was 3 or 4. So it kind of depended on. I just made every mission different, but I just essentially made it so that they could all work, at least function, on all 4 of the arena kill zones as well as non-arena kill zones. That was sort of the main purpose of it. Now I did run, regardless of whether or not I should have been using the Ultima missions in the first place, that was just sort of something that happened. But I did actually run 3 local tournaments that had a minimum of 10 players every time with that mission pack, and then I got feedback and changed things each time I did that. And so that did actually help a lot in terms of, before BAO, make it at least I knew that it would work in that scenario, with going, alternating back and forth between arena and non-arena terrain with those missions, and no faction seemed to have a crazy advantage. I mean, a lot of it obviously comes down to, especially with the arena hasn't been around that long. It doesn't have this gigantic 40K community that's doing 800 person tournaments and things like that. So I think area of balance and who's good at which faction and all that kind of stuff can flip flop really fast in Arena. If somebody came out and just one of the best players decided to play Tyranids or something, and they won a bunch of tournaments like Elliot did with Poxwalkers and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that's definitely something that, as much as we want to look at those statistics and results and say, oh, well, that means that that's faction good, or those models are good, or those models are bad, I think because of the size of the kill team community, it comes it's just all about the players that spend the time practicing and knowing what's good, or even if they're just experienced 40k players who you take those skills from 40k and apply them to kill team, and they're like they can almost immediately do well.
Yeah, no, indeed, I agree. But staying quickly on topic there, when it came to the primary objectives, it was an amount of primary objectives, but there was never like, this is worth 1, that's worth 2. They were all worth a single VP per holding them per round. Or was it the case of you hold 1, you get a VP, you hold 2, you get a second, you hold more than your opponent, you get 3?
Yes, it was the same as the Nova or Annihilation primary objectives. Yes, where if you hold 1 objective, you get 1 victory point. If you hold 2, you get another one. If you hold more than your opponent, you get another one. So essentially, you can, for the primary objectives, you could max out at 3 victory points per turn. Now, one of the other things that will definitely be changing in the future after doing BAO and doing some testing is that a little bit of maybe a wording. A rules wording discrepancy was that as a way to make it easier to keep track of on the score sheets, as well as making it easy for the players to understand, I essentially just made the primary objectives the same as the secondary objectives, in the sense that you max out at 3 points per primary objective. Whereas the original way that system is, I think, supposed to work is that there's basically supposed to be a max of 9 points that you can gain from the primary objectives. So rather than each one being limited to 3 points each, you could theoretically hold 1 objective for all 4 turns and get 4 points for that, or hold 2 objectives for all 4 turns. But the total you can get for the primary objectives is 9 points. And that makes a big difference, when you have 3 custodes models and they only need to hold 2 objectives to get 8 out of those 9 points over 4 turns.
Hold on, run that past me again. So the way it is originally, you can hold a single point, and that gives you potentially an infinite number of VP, and that's how you ran it.
1 VP for each turn.
Yeah.
Just get
but
one.
you're saying...
No, that's not how I ran it at BAO.
Okay.
At BAO, I limited each primary objective to 3, just like the secondary objectives, so you could still max out the 9, but if you wanted to max out the 9, you had to hold more than your opponent for 3 turns out of the 4.
Okay.
Which,
that's fair.
May not necessarily be that bad for certain factions, but it definitely changed the dynamic, I think, of how those were meant to work originally.
Okay, I understand. So you were treating each of those 3 scoreable primaries as an individual. Right. Okay.
Right.
I understand now. Yeah. Cool. It took me a while to get there.
Which made it way smoother for... Basically, the reason I did that was I did it the other way originally. And then I had a bunch of tournaments, some, a few new players, a few not new players. But basically, I had a ton of questions saying, can I score this multiple times? And people were scoring their sheets wrong. They weren't sure how to score it for whatever reason. And so I just said, okay, I'm just going to simplify it. And in hindsight, I think from a competitive point of view and balance point of view, it's probably not the best way to do it. But from a simplicity point of view, it worked for that. And I don't think, due to the nature of the skill of the players right now in Kill Team and at BAO and everything, I don't think it really would have changed the outcome too much. But in the future, I'm definitely going to make it so that it's the way that I think it's meant to be played, in that you can score a single primary objective 4 times throughout, for 1 for each turn, essentially, as opposed to maxing out at 3. But then the total that you can score for the whole game is 9 for the
Yes,
primary.
understood.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that we kind of know how you got to doing the tournament pack and what the tournament pack is. So I guess I guess some questions about options you made, right? Because at some
Right.
point you had to not only make an FAQ, because that's
Yeah.
something that people maybe don't always think about. They think, oh well, I've got to make a tournament pack, but
Yeah.
you, as a tournament organizer, you are going to be asked, oh,
Yeah.
can you whatever?
Yeah.
Can you open a
Yeah.
door if there's a model on the other side once you've moved
Right.
into it? Can you
Yeah.
advance after, or can you charge after advancing in the veteran
Yeah.
move, etc., etc.? There are lots of rules with small things, so obviously you had to make that FAQ for your own tournament as well. So,
Yeah. We're going to have one for LVO as well, for
well,
sure.
you'll need it, yeah. Yeah, there's going to
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
lot of questions, I'm sure, especially with elites out now. Let's hope
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
get an FAQ from GW before then. So
Yeah.
will at least make
I think
your
we
job a
probably
bit
will.
easier? Well, yeah, no, we should. If we don't, I'll
next
be a bit
next next
weird.
January.
Yeah. Um, okay, so one thing I noticed is that you went very rules as written, very raw, and I say
Yes.
that because you didn't allow the objective in the center to work.
Right.
I,
No. What do you
as
mean? You mean like the
the
secondary objective domination, or
uh nope,
like I?
the no, not domination, or was it domination? The one you mentioned earlier, where there was a primary objective, I thought it was, that's in the center of the map, but you had to move it because in one of the arena boards there's a red lined wall in the middle of the map, and so
Right.
technically, because you can never measure through
Yeah.
um the center through a red lined wall,
Yeah.
it was so. I personally would have said, both, with that primary central
Right.
objective and with domination, that
Yeah.
you can measure through the wall because it's
Oh yeah.
clearly, I feel, intended that you could do that. But you were
Yeah.
like, no, no, rules as written. So why did you
It
do that?
basically it was just to reduce the amount of confusion or questions, so that because if that was the only mission, or if there was a couple of missions that had an objective in the center, and we happened to use that arena kill zone that blocked that out, every single person would be like, how are we going to rule this objective? Some people would say, oh, that's not how the rules are written. Some people said they would. And so I just wanted to take that confusion out of the equation altogether, essentially.
Which kind of raises another question there. How did you decide which mission to play on which board? From the sounds of it, you presumably you could have just said, okay, well, we'll never play that mission on that board. But did you roll it randomly then?
Uh, for my tournaments, I didn't roll it randomly. I chose the order that I thought, like, so for example, at BAO, the first day we went back and forth, between arena and non-arena. But it was 5 rounds. So I think the first day it was 3 rounds of arena and 2 rounds of non-arena, or it might have been the other way around. I can't remember. But essentially, I reversed it for each day. So the first, and because they were completely separate tournaments, the first day I did, let's say, 3 rounds of arena and 2 rounds of non-arena, and then the other day I did 3 rounds of non-arena and 2 rounds of arena. And I also switched up because I had designed the missions to work with any arena board and any non-arena terrain. I tried to essentially just mix it up as much as I could. And so the first day, certain missions were only used on arena, and then in the second day, those missions were used in non-arena.
Okay,
So I basically
fair enough.
I just tried to sort of mix it up as much as I could to keep people on their toes.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Were there any other? So I guess with the FAQ, I know that you worked on that like alongside other people. It wasn't just you sitting
Yeah,
down
yeah.
and pouring through the rulebook and saying, "Well, that's confusing."
Yeah.
Um, Generally, did you go rules as written or rules as intended? And
Definitely
why?
rules
And why?
rules as written. Definitely rules as written, for sure. I
Okay.
mean, because that's, if you can, for example, one of the things that came up was, or maybe, I mean, it kind of depends also on your definition of what, if two people are interpreting the actual writing in the book as meaning two different things. To one person, that's rules as written, and to the other person, that's rules as written. And so if you decide to go with one interpretation of rules, then the person whose interpretation you're not going with is going to say, okay, well, you're just going with rules as intended, not as rules as written. So yeah, when there's literal language ambiguity in a rule, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing, because are you actually doing rules as intended or rules as written if you're just interpreting that wording to mean a certain thing? But I kind of, I just tried to do what I thought was best and make rulings that worked, that I thought that how it was meant to be played. And whether, in terms of it being rules as written for most things, and if it was just literally impossible to come to an agreement of understanding of how that rule was written, then definitely rules, as intended, because that's all you can do at that point, if it's literally
So
doesn't work.
I recently, in a recent video, argued the point only very briefly, that if there are any vague rules, and because there are, there are.
Yeah.
And you get into an argument between two people, you have to rule on it one way or the other. Fine, that's not an issue. It's not really an issue. And it doesn't even matter whether tournament A rules it this way and tournament B rules it that way.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I think that happens in 40k all the time. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, yeah, I assume it does. I don't play a commonest game like that.
There's way more rules than regular 40k, and I know for sure that just comes up all the time where a TO or a judge just has to make a call, and that could change from tournament to tournament for certain rules.
Definitely. But I argue that any time where there is that, rules as written is kind of, as you say, irrelevant, because two people are reading the same words and they're both rules as written. Would you ever, or did you ever, very deliberately rule it in the way that you felt was either more fun or more balanced, as opposed to what you actually thought was intended, if you see what I mean? Yeah.
One example actually, and this came up because you and a couple of other people who went to Warhammer World and talked to the the rules guys at Games Workshop about that Necron tactic, the prime reanimation protocols at BAO. That came up in a game that Sheldon was playing, and we essentially ruled it that I think it only came up once, and they rolled off, because basically what happened is he made the injury roll. Sheldon waited to use the tactic and then used it afterwards. And now that I know from you asking the guys at Games Workshop, it's essentially that's okay, and you're allowed to do that. But at the time, the way that it's worded, I don't know if you've read it, it definitely could be interpreted to sound like it's happening at the same time as the injury roll.
Well,
and so yeah, that was a perfect example where I, after the fact, in hindsight, I made the wrong call, only because I wouldn't say necessarily wrong call, but after knowing what apparently the Games Workshop rules guys have intended for it, that was something that came up. But
well, I'm not going to harp on it for too long, but that is rules as intended. Because if you actually read the rule, it's very clearly worded for anyone that has some pretty basic English comprehension that you have to use it before the roll is made. That is how they worded it. The fact that they told me the way they intended it doesn't change what they've said. However, whatever, doesn't matter, I guess.
Thank you. That makes me feel a little bit better.
No, that's 100%.
It's really only Sheldon that would be the one that would be annoyed at that.
So because obviously before I went to that Warhammer World thing, I put together a list of questions to ask them, and that was one that I asked. And before I went, I looked into it. I read the rule. I was like, yeah, well,
Yeah.
The way they've, put the commas in, they clearly mean it has to be used when it is wrote, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Anyway, let's
Oh,
move on.
you actually said that to them when
Yes.
you were asking that question,
Yeah, and they were like,
and they
they was
just
like,
said no.
oh, sorry, mate, we don't really write rules here. Anyway, let's not. I'm gonna get
Well,
triggered.
actually,
I'm gonna get
no,
triggered.
no, just to sort of in that area of the way that they handle the rules and everything. Beernid 40K made a really interesting point to me a couple of days ago about how when they write these rules, they're working on stuff a year, 2 years in advance, and so when we're playing the game now and asking questions now, at their office, they're working on stuff that isn't coming out for a year or 2 years. And so it's almost like us coming at them from the past and saying, hey, this thing, this thing that you designed a year or 2 years ago, what do you think about it? Is this rule wrong or whatever? And so they're just sort of not focused on that at all, which I find kind of interesting because it makes me think that it's crazy that they even sort of do FAQs and things like that, because it's essentially like them going backwards in terms of the way that they design stuff and working on stuff that's been, in their mind that has been done with for a year or more.
Yeah,
And
no, it's
so
he.
it's
For
I
what we
don't
know,
necessarily think I agree with that way of doing it, but I can see why that
hmm,
causes a lot of the issues that we have with the rules and everything.
yeah. I mean, from what we know about the design studio, that is how they operate,
Yeah,
and when you and it totally makes sense why they are so big into rules as intended,
right.
because they can't remember what they wrote 2 years ago. Nobody could.
Yeah,
That's crazy. Like they
yeah,
wrote the rules, and I believe when I spoke to them, they said there were like 4 or 5 iterations of this version of Kill Team
yeah,
before they settled on the current one. So not only are they currently writing 40k, Age of Sigmar,
yeah,
Necromunda rules,
yeah,
Warcry rules, like all of their
yeah,
games, they are
yeah,
also remembering previous editions of Kill Team that were never released. I was like,
yeah,
well, yeah, who cares what the rulebook says? Like, yeah, they
yeah,
they have to go with what it what they think
yeah,
it meant. So, kind of, the rules are just up in the air. Whatever. We shouldn't
yeah.
listen to them too much, is what I'm saying. Anyway, moving on from that little rant about GW. So I
But
was I was
I think that actually. Sorry to interrupt you again. You should mute me. Um, that kind of ties into, because I was just watching your video that you made before this about community rules and things like that, and I think that in a way makes that point better, in the sense that if that's the way that they work, it makes actually more sense for the community to come up with things that work the best for everyone.
Oh yeah, like when I say, oh, Games Workshop can't write rules, like I'm sure they can, like 100%, but I think they're seriously overworked. Like for the amount of
Yeah,
rules they put out and the work they do, they're not
yeah,
a big team. Like
right.
I think there's 7. That's it for all of their
I don't know.
games, and they're all writing on multiple games at the same time.
Yeah.
I was like, like I don't know if you know, but there's a new game coming out from a tiny studio that hasn't been heard of before called
Hmm.
Parabellum Games, and they're releasing Conquerors: Last Argument of Kings. It's like a rank and file fantasy game. They have
Okay.
30 rule designers on it
Really?
on one game. Games
Wow.
Workshop, the biggest miniatures company, has
Yeah.
7 across what? How many systems?
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Anyway, I could rant about GW
And
all the time.
Kill Team is definitely not. I mean, for better or worse, it's definitely not at the top of their priority list in terms of getting their rules writers to focus on it and all that kind of stuff.
I'm sure that right now their rules designers are going on 9th edition 40k, and I don't
Oh
think
yeah,
they're
yeah,
thinking about anything else at all, if I'm honest.
yeah,
But that's fine. I'm looking forward to
yeah,
9th, so that's cool. Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, I was about to ask it a while ago, and I mean this in the kindest way possible. But is your rules pack still needed after you discovered Ultima missions are as flexible and adaptable
Right.
as you realized that they were?
I would say only to make it more accessible to everyone, because everyone, I mean, everyone may not have Arena or buy it. And I think sort of having a rules set specifically just for tournaments that shows the measurement. Also, it doesn't have the measurements for using non-arena terrain, and so I had to go through each board and sort of try and at least get it to within a half inch of each measurement for the deployment zones and where the objectives are and everything, so that you can look at that setup and use it for any non-arena board. So in that sense, yeah, just to make it accessible for everyone, it's definitely needed.
Okay. Are you considering, again, off the back of realizing that it is actually as flexible as it is, are you
Yeah.
considering making yours slightly more extreme, to make it more different from the Ultima missions? Or are you kind of happy with there being two similar versions of a tournament pack?
What do you mean two similar versions? What would be the other version?
Ultima and yours?
Oh, my missions that I'm created for BAO, they are going to be not used anymore for sure.
Oh,
Yeah, I think
well, we'll
going
come to that in a
forward,
sec. We'll come to that in a
yeah,
sec because it's one of my questions. Changes going forward. We'll come to that.
yeah.
Okay. Um. Oh, well, maybe this is kind of, okay. So, right. So my next question is, you said that you had slightly different primary objectives, but ultimately you were always playing. Holding one objective gives you one VP.
Yeah,
Holding two gives you a second, or well, holding
yeah,
another gives you a second VP, and
yeah.
holding more than your opponent gives you a third.
Right.
And that is, how all of the arena objectives are played.
Yeah,
That is the competitive way. It makes sense. Cool.
yeah,
Why, as somebody able to make their own tournament pack and putting a lot of
right.
work into it, why did you use the same primary objective for all of the missions?
Um, I think because there was no reason not to. I guess at the time it was kind of like the base way that essentially, because the template, where the original template for these missions was the Nova and Annihilation missions, and so I kind of wanted to change those as little as possible. Essentially, I just wanted it to work with arena and non-arena terrain. That was really the main thing. And so because those primary objectives weren't really affected by the location of the objectives and all that kind of stuff, then there didn't really seem to be a reason to change them at the time.
So
Yeah,
you,
even though I kind of did change them, maybe unintentionally, by
sure.
not allowing each one to be scored all 4 turns.
So you were primarily trying to adapt arena tournament
Yeah,
style objectives to being used on both arena and vanilla, and that was the
right.
core idea behind
Yeah,
your tournament pack then.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
fair enough. That makes sense then.
Yeah, mainly because I realized that not everyone was going to have access to it, and as a tournament organizer, if you already have a whole bunch of non-arena terrain, just not using that because arena exists didn't seem to make sense. So I felt like, but at the same time, arena was fun. It was like a new way to play the game, and it was obviously designed to be fair and competitive for kill teams specifically. And so it made sense to kind of try and mix those two things together. To me, anyways.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to skip the next question because it might come up in the changes. But
Yeah.
you mentioned it briefly, but how much testing did you do, and in what forms of your pack before actually
Right.
giving it its final official run at BAO?
So when I decided to try and combine arena and non-arena terrain, um, And basically, I knew that I had to come up with some way to have the objectives and everything work. So I designed the layouts of the placement of the objectives, the deployment zones, the missions, and all that kind of stuff initially. And then me and like maybe 5 or 6 friends got together and played a bunch of games. And I shared them actually with people that I'd met at LVO. And they were totally down for helping to test it and everything. So actually one of the main contributors to making that better was Michael Holy.
I knew you were going to say that because he
number
won.
one ranked.
Doesn't that seem a little bit odd? Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, he got second at LVO. But anyways, he was like really happy to help test it and everything, as well as he worked actually. He played against I think, and Biranid helped out, and people from all over the world essentially were testing it, as well as my local group. And then I used it in 3 full tournaments before BAO and made, changes to it leading up to that. And I was, at the time, I was like totally open, and I mean, still always am. I was totally open to any changes or feedback that could be made to it just to make it better and more balanced and fair and work for everybody.
What were some of the changes you made along the way, out of curiosity? Anything
probably big? Changing some of the objective, the prime, what are they called? Bonus objectives for the missions and how they worked, and some of the objective placement areas. And also I changed the wording of some of the secondary objectives to be a little less ambiguous. For example, bounty hunters, the question always comes up, well, what kind of a move can you pick up the bounty hunter token from? So I just said, okay, let's just make this like the rest of the secondary objectives for simplicity's sake, and say that if you're within an inch of it at the end of the battle round, you can pick one of them up. And so I felt like that just sort of worked easier. It had like essentially the same thing, the same outcome in 99% of cases, but it was just easier to understand and all that kind of stuff. So kind of little tweaks like that. The primary objectives obviously stayed the same. And, I did go back and forth between the idea of using all 18 secondary objectives, which is definitely a point of contention now. And I'm definitely moving away from that as well, but we can talk about that after. The pack was so close to the way that the Arena and Annihilation or Nova mission packs worked, that the changes didn't have to be huge, essentially. But I did get a lot of feedback from it for sure.
I guess another question, maybe this is just me miscounting, but you had 18 secondaries, didn't you?
Right.
Arena doesn't have that many. Did you get the other from the Annihilation pack? Or?
Yes, and you'll be happy to know I literally just took that sheet of 18 secondaries and I checked off which ones were only in the Nova Annihilation pack, which ones were only in Arena, and which ones were shared between the two. And it seems pretty obvious that they were divided up in groups of 6 missions, which with the Ultima way of doing tournament missions, you pick 6 randomly, essentially, from that list of 12. And after looking it over, in hindsight, looking at the various objectives, the ones that are not included in Arena are actually basically the same objectives that no one ever picked, or very, very rarely picked in any of the tournaments that I did where all 18 were allowed. So essentially, using only the Arena objectives, in reality, it's actually not going to be that much different, even though psychologically it might feel different because you feel like your choices are being restricted. But
give us a random one that was never picked.
A random one that was never picked?
Let's see if we can figure out why.
I mean, I wouldn't say they were never picked, but they were like rarely picked.
Okay.
Hammering, for example.
Which one's that?
There's a secondary objective called Hammering that is not in the Arena pack. It was only in the Nova, and it was like removed, or whatever you want to call it. It essentially says at the end of the fight phase, score 1 victory point if you made 3 or more injury rolls for enemy models in that phase. So you have to make 3 injury rolls in the fight phase.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, good luck to that person. I don't think
Right,
they
and
need the
so
extra VP. They're winning.
after looking at that and separating them out and seeing which ones were carried over to Arena and which ones weren't, it seems pretty apparent to me that they took those 6 objectives and said, other than Called Shot. Called Shot was the only secondary objective that is not in Arena and was in the Nova Annihilation secondary objectives that people picked all the time. And so, who knows how they came to those decisions, but it seems from my experience of running those tournaments and how people chose their secondaries from all 18, it seems fairly apparent to me that they made those decisions on purpose because, obviously they did, but it's more obvious to me how they made that decision because those secondary objectives were hardly ever picked anyways, out of the 18.
Interesting. It's almost like much. We all like to say they don't, but it's almost like they do actually test their game.
Yeah, I'm
I
definitely.
don't know if I believe it. I don't know if I believe it, but okay. You mentioned that Nova, run by
Yes.
Mike Brandt, is just using the Ultimate missions.
As far as
Okay.
I know,
Okay.
I don't think that pack has been released yet.
No, I don't think it has. But I thought maybe he'd said something.
That's the one. Yeah, I think it on their website. If you go to the primer for it, it does say it's going to be using the Arena missions, and I think he's said on Facebook that they are going to be using the Ultima missions. But I'm hoping, it might. I'm still working on the, the sort of black and white measurement version of the Ultima missions, but I wouldn't be surprised if they come up with a similar version of that for Nova, hopefully, because that would make, having a consistent format for everything a lot easier.
Although the belief is that he's
basically
still
just
doing...
that it includes non-arena terrain for those missions. That's really the main thing.
Although we believe he's still doing 100 points, not 125. Whereas it seems like most tournaments that I hear about that aren't Nova are now embracing 125, aren't they? That's what I see. That's what I see.
Yeah. I would say in the last couple weeks of tournaments that people are talking about, they definitely are. I don't think that's necessary. It's a really interesting point, and it's really tricky to work with as a tournament organizer, only because, whether you use 125 points or 150 points, if you know that certain other tournaments like Adepticon or Nova are never going to not use 100 points, and you want all of the tournaments to be the same, it kind of comes down to trying to figure out who you're trying to make happy in the end, I guess, in terms of choosing those point values. But I do think, trying the different point values for other tournaments is totally great. And I'm looking forward to the SoCal Open as well.
Okay.
Is it called the SoCal?
Is it the Open? SoCal? Anyway, SoCal. That's what I call it. Okay. Fair enough. So the next question is a bit of an odd one. That's, I don't know. So, okay. A thing that people like, competitive players like, is consistency, right? They like to build a list for a specific thing, and they want to go against that thing, right?
Yeah.
And they want to say, hey, look, I have built a list that works really well, and I am the best player because I have managed to craft this list outside of the game. I've played that meta game.
Practice with it. And all that kind of stuff.
And that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
So why do we not just play a single objective? Like, for 5 rounds, why do we have different objectives? This is a bit of an open-ended question. I'm not
when you say
criticizing
objective,
anything.
what kind of
primary objectives? Why do we differ where the objectives are? Why do we change the secondaries? Why don't we just give these hyper competitive people that there's a
The same thing
single,
every single time.
yeah, why? What are your thoughts?
Uh, Probably because it wouldn't be very fun for many
I know
people.
that, but that's not, but
I mean, that's kind of the
in
main
reality,
counter
if you're
argument.
always doing the same primary objectives of, hold one, get one, hold two, get two,
Yeah,
hold more, get three, right? If you're always doing that, and the only difference is you've either got four, five, or six primaries,
right.
is it really that huge a difference anyway?
You mean in terms of just not changing any of those things?
Sure, why not? I mean, why not just always run five?
Five objective markers.
Five objective markers on the board, sure.
Yeah, and that's actually what the ultimate missions do.
Okay.
And so I think maybe that is a good way to go.
Okay.
And my missions that I created for BAO didn't necessarily take that into account because I was trying to make them all unique and have a different feel and all that kind of stuff. Essentially, just to make it unique and not necessarily. Oh, you froze for a second there, or did you freeze?
No,
Anyways,
I'm making every time I look over here, I'm making sure that I'm still recording because I'm so paranoid that I
you
just
became
stopped
invisible.
recording.
You were
Yeah, yeah,
you pulled a Drax.
yeah.
Um, what was I saying again?
So I asked you about why why have multiple objectives when they're not really different, having four, five, or six.
Right.
Why not just go with five? And you said that's how Ultimate does do it.
Yeah. And so and in the terms of the design of the BAO missions, why they did five, I was kind of just trying to make it different for each mission and make each one have its own unique feel to it and use different mechanics. Because I was designing them myself and making them, but with feedback and everything, and I just wanted them to work as well as they could for both arena and non-arena, and that was kind of my main option at that point.
Well, I
But
do like the five objectives idea. It's
yeah,
symmetrical, two on your side, two on their side, one in the middle. Is like, okay,
yeah.
that makes
Or
sense.
I mean, some of them are five right across the middle of the
Right,
map in a line.
right.
And from the games that I've played lately of the Ultimate missions, and the main reason, other than the pressure from other big tournaments and things that want to run those in that way, whether it's Adepticon or Nova or just trying to a SoCal wanting to have kind of a general format that works for all tournaments. But from my own experience in doing the actual testing, I've realized that those missions actually are really fun and they feel really balanced, even when you're playing 3 custodes against a horde of 20 gaunts. And so in the testing I would call it testing, but in the games that I've been running with it, we've really tried to actually create those extreme circumstances to see if the things that people are saying about different factions, things like that, are actually true. That, it's impossible for a team with 3 models to win. And it's totally not the case if you use those missions with the way that those objectives are laid out. Now, we did realize that you have to allow the scoring of holding one objective for 4 turns and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But it feels fun and balanced, essentially, and which makes sense because I think the only reason that you would, and I know this is going to be a point of contention because of the idea of elites and the point values and everything, but purely from the only information that we have from Games Workshop, we have to assume that they're not lying when they say that all of the testing they did, the way that they chose the point values was specifically for 100 points using these specific missions. And when you play them that way, they seem to work from what and you can kind of do it right. You can tell right away when you're playing, an extreme case where you've got 3 Custodes models. And that was even we tried to pick the secondary objectives that were like the worst for them, because in the Ultimate, and I don't know if they're going to do this at Nova, and I also don't know if I would do it that way in our mission pack in terms of randomly determining the 6 objectives that you choose from, the 6 secondary objectives. But we tried to create a scenario where, okay, we rolled the best possible secondaries for Horde teams and the worst possible for Custodes, and it still was really close. And in every other scenario, whether you've got Space Marines or other factions that have different numbers of models and different things, I would think that would only make it even more balanced if you're starting with the most extreme teams in terms of model count. But at the same time, I totally get the need and want for everyone to want to play the cool models and the elite models more and more of them. Like, I know that that's the main drive to run higher point teams, because people want to play with the cool models that they have, and they want to have they want to feel like they're playing with a team in a way that they feel like it is supposed to be. What's the word? Like, what am I trying to say? You can edit this part out.
Yeah, no, this is staying in. This is staying in. I don't edit.
Okay, here's what I'm trying to say. For
yeah.
example, with Khorne Berserkers, or if you're an old school 40k player and you know about those the chaos numbers, like Khorne is 8, Zinch is 9, Nurgle is 6 or 7, Slaanesh is 5, I think. Anyways, each of the Chaos Gods had a number that was sort of their lucky number, essentially. And you used to get some sort of a bonus if you had squads that were that number. And I'm sure every faction has an idea of like some makeup of a group of models that's a certain number of a certain type of unit or a certain type of model that feels more narrative to them. And I think that is one of the big issues with Kill Team Elites being only 100 points, because people want to run more than one Terminator or more than one, whatever elite model is. But if strategically it doesn't make sense to have more than one, or you just can't fit it because of the points, it makes sense to want the points values to increase, even if the game hasn't been tested for it that way.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. So bit of an odd one that I think is probably an easy, quick question for you. So, and again, this is how it's played in the book. But do you think that being able to max out on all objectives, that I've worded that poorly. Do you believe that being able to, have a limit on every objective is a good thing? Or do you think you should open that up a bit so that perhaps there
Do you mean
wasn't a limit? Um, anything. Secondaries, primaries, whatever. Why have a limit in the primaries of 9?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, do you think that's a hard limit that's needed, or is it open to a bit of interpretation?
Well, I mean, it kind of just comes down to what we feel is best for the game. I mean, it also comes down to whether we feel that if there's any reason to change any of those things, if it's been tested, and if we know that all of those things have been tested to be fair and balanced. And the only reason we wouldn't think that is if we didn't believe what Mike Brandt says, essentially. And whether that's totally up to each individual to figure that out for themselves. But if we assume that they have no reason to mislead us in those areas, then anything outside of what they're saying has been tested and is fair and balanced. You kind of have to assume that it's not going to be fair and balanced because it hasn't been tested. And that doesn't mean that it's not good or that it can't be fun or that it can't make the game better for everybody. But you kind of have to start with, I think the conversation around changes to the game kind of have to start with the real reason why we want to make those changes, as opposed to saying, oh, it's not fair and balanced XYZ, when that's not really true, because those things that people are talking about changing, as far as we know, have been tested, and the changes have been made for a reason, and the points values have been set for a reason. And as much as it is, I'm totally down with trying different things and doing tournaments at different point levels and things like that. But I think the conversation has to be around the original reason why we're doing that, as opposed to, I think a lot of people talk about it in terms of balance and fairness, when it's hard to actually say that and it actually be true if we haven't had a huge tournament at 150 points, or done, some really hardcore play testing or something like that at a particular point level.
Yeah, no, I agree. You've got to playtest everything. It's great to have an
Yeah.
idea. It's great to have a theory, but
Yeah.
run with that theory, test it, see if it
Yeah.
actually works. And
Yeah.
we need more than anecdotal evidence,
Yeah.
like we need to.
Like, I played one game and this was
Exactly.
bad.
Yeah, yeah. Like I played 3 games against Custodes and I won all 3 times.
Yeah.
Therefore, Custodes are crap and they should never
Right.
be played. So
Yeah.
like, yeah. Okay, fair enough. I don't know. I suppose I agree with you. Although I'm at the moment quite big on the whole of doing our own thing as a community.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think Kill Team is that unbalanced. I think there are bad
Yeah.
matchups, but that's fine. I don't inherently have an issue with bad matchups.
Yeah.
It sucks to say, oh, I'm going against Tyranids, who, doing 19
Yeah.
gaunts, one warrior, and I didn't bring what I need to kill them on my roster.
Now,
It's like, well,
my question
yeah.
to you is, what missions were you playing when you did this, and how did you do the objectives and all that kind of stuff?
Me and him just played Recover Intelligence straight out of the core rulebook. No secondaries. It was just out of the book. Which, if you don't remember, is the 2 objectives on your side are
Right.
1 point. 2 objectives on the enemy side, 2 points. Objective in the center, 3 points.
Right.
There you go. So it's not like we were playing a
So.
hard, competitive game. But
Right.
as I said, this player is generally, I would consider, a better player than me. And I managed to beat him 3 times in a row, which never happens. So
Interesting. And that's the thing, is that when lots of people play various types of missions and then talk about how tournaments should be run and things like that, I think it has to come down to what missions you're playing, or practicing with, or doing testing or whatever. And I think a lot of the ideas and opinions that are coming from different places, everyone's playing different missions when they're talking about these things, and it's tricky, and that's on some part a little bit of a failure on Games Workshop's part, by not making it clearer what missions people should be playing if they want to play a fair, balanced game.
and not
And I
making
know
it clear that apparently Commanders was never tested, and so we shouldn't consider them for.
yeah.
I'm not going to rant
Right.
about that. Carry on. Sorry.
But there's and there's this really interesting, and I don't know if Games Workshop is the only community that has this issue, but that whole sort of feel around using, or not telling not wanting to limit players who may play casually by saying you have to run these missions this way, but at the same time wanting competitive players to also be able to use the rules and everything in a certain way, and combine, they're constantly trying to work with those two communities, even though statistically our competitive community is tiny compared to the rest of their stuff. But
That's what
and
they
that's another
always
reason
say.
that's another reason. I mean, I think it's growing, to be honest, only because I think the general idea around competitive video gaming is changing as well, and that, I think, has in the whole world of sort of gaming in general, whether it's tabletop gaming or digital, is I think moving more towards, or being, is tilting towards the competitive aspect because of League of Legends,
I think
Fortnite, all
tilting
that
is
kind
the
of
right
stuff,
word. Yeah.
or has already tilted or whatever. But I mean, what I'm saying is, like, the average player that comes into Kill Team or 40K from having experience in those other games definitely affects what they want to get out of it. And I think that mindset of wanting a game to be fair and balanced and somewhat competitive, even from the casual players, is something that I think is growing in the community for sure.
Yeah, I think in potentially in large part due to X-Wing, which obviously overtook Games Workshop or
Right.
40K and Age of Sigmar as the top miniatures
Yeah.
game, and that game
Yeah.
is almost entirely competitive.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
even if not competitive, it is,
Right.
it is 100 points dogfight skirmish.
Right.
Yeah, technically there were narrative missions, but I don't think they really got played. Anyway, diving into the next question, which is, shall we go straight to the big changes and lessons learned?
We can.
Mm,
Unless
let's,
you have another.
uh, okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay.
I'm
So,
sure I'm going to go off on a tangent that's not even
yeah, yeah.
related to
Okay,
that at
so
all.
what? Okay, so shall we do secondaries first?
Right.
So, I've had issue with the idea of giving everybody access to all 18 secondaries
Yeah.
every time,
Yeah.
but you did that. But now you're saying that you're thinking that that wasn't the right choice. What's changed your mind?
Partly, and I may sound like I'm repeating myself a bit, but it just is. It is what it is. Part of that's from the recent testing I've done with the Ultima missions and the secondary objectives and choosing them for that. Also, looking at the list and knowing what people, and having the statistics of all these other tournaments and knowing what secondary objectives people's picked, as well as sort of even from talking to Michael Holy and the other NL Kill Team players that have won all of these tournaments. It seems fairly evident to most of us that having all of that, and I mean, to the guys at who've done all the testing, Mike Brandt and stuff, this is obvious, and this is stuff that they've actually already gone through in their testing, and we're sort of just catching up at this point, in terms of that making it easier for certain teams to it's just less balanced essentially. And even though the tournaments that we've run that have only had 10 to 20 people max in that area, except for LVO, Nova, Adepticon, which have more obviously, but the smaller local tournaments that are happening all over the place, it probably doesn't make that huge of a difference, whether you allow all 18 or not. But purely from making the larger tournaments as fair and balanced as possible, it probably makes more sense to not, or definitely does make more sense, I should say, especially after testing it, to not allow all 18. And it's really, as much as it might feel like we're reducing the choices a lot, because that's what we did at BAO, that's how we did it at BAO, it's not going to make that big of a difference, I think, because the secondary objectives that people pick anyways will be very similar, essentially.
So, my understanding of what you've said there is that when given the full spectrum of everything they could possibly choose, they
Yeah.
always chose the same ones because
Yeah.
those were the best ones for their team.
Which
And
seems
so
obvious, I know, but
I believe that was roughly my argument. Yeah, that you're going to build your team knowing, okay, well,
yeah,
in every mission, I have to
yeah,
capture 3 objectives
yeah,
and I have to kill 3 people and
yeah.
touch all board edges. And
No,
so,
actually,
yeah,
there was one other factor that came into play
okay.
in terms of making that decision, and it is related to the missions that I created for BAO to be used with non-arena and arena. Because in the testing and the different tournaments that we did, it did seem like we needed a way to make it to balance the game a little bit away from horde style teams, because my missions obviously we're not the ultimate missions. We were running the primary objective slightly differently because you could only hold one objective for 3 times for the primaries. And so we actually found that we needed to balance it a little bit more in the direction of more elite teams, because it did feel for some people originally when I first created it that horde teams definitely had an advantage. Now that also the original Nova Annihilation missions also had that issue. And so because we were kind of going off of that template, and that's part of the reason Elliot dominated at Adepticon and things like that, because they were using that rule set. So because we were going off of that template, we ended up having to try and tilt it slightly away from horde teams in the best way that we could, especially with the missions that I created, and allowing the elite teams to always pick, attrition or thin their ranks and secondary objectives that definitely benefited them, helped with that balance a little bit. We found anyways, but after doing the Ultima missions, it's actually totally unnecessary from our experience, which makes sense because they would have been tested in that scenario anyways. And but yeah, no, I think it's going to be good going forward using that
So
format.
why
What?
isn't it necessary to give them access to all of those secondaries in the ultimate missions?
Because first of all, 6 of them weren't being used very much at all anyways. So at this point, you're saying, why wouldn't you give them access to all 12? And out of those 12, there might be 3 or 4 that like a horde team would use every single time. And I think specifically with the Ultima missions, it might, because they weren't designed to necessarily be used all at the same time, being basically able to use the perfect 3, killy objectives, or the perfect 3 area, spreading your army out or spreading your team out objectives. They probably weren't designed to be used that way. And I think going forward, assuming we're talking about changes in going forward, that having a specific 6 for each mission that's different for every mission, but allows, certain team to pick, whichever secondary objectives they want out of those 6, obviously. But having it so that the horde type teams have objectives that they might want to pick, and the shooty, if those are the 2 extremes, like more elite Deathwatch, Custodes type teams have secondaries that they want to pick. Now, in the end, I think it'll actually work out being very similar in the sense that they'll probably pick the same ones every time, and the elite team will pick the same secondary objectives every time. But if it's different for each mission, then they will have to make slightly different choices for each mission. And in a way, that's kind of like having a different primary objective, in a sense, even though it's a small choice that they have to make. If it's different for every mission, it's kind of like having a different. I know I say a lot, don't I?
Yeah, no,
it's kind of like having a different bonus objective, basically.
sure, sure, no, I agree. I think the maxim or whatever is, if you can choose everything, there is no choice.
Right.
Yeah, that's that's my general thought on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay,
Yeah,
so
and in a way, it might be like having, because you were talking about why don't you change the primary objective, and if you're allowing all 18 secondary objectives every single time, and the best players are just picking the exact same 3 secondary objectives every single time, in a way, you're kind of changing their primary objective by not allowing them to choose those 3 secondary objectives every single
yeah,
time.
yeah,
And also by playing the primary objective correctly and allowing the holding 1 to be scored 4 times, that original alteration that we made in terms of allowing all 18 specifically to try and help elite teams is not as necessary anymore, basically.
sure. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So what else did you lessons going forwards? Any others that
From
you haven't already
BAO,
mentioned? Of course, I mean.
yeah, I mean, that whole world of combining arena and non-arena terrain is really interesting because, for example, at SoCal, he's running 1 day arena and 1 day non-arena. And so that idea of combining arena and non-arena in a single tournament is totally my own, what do you want to call it? Sort of
Devising. Sure.
aspiration.
Okay. I like it. I
Um,
think that's a really good aspect of the BAO pack, actually.
that maybe some people think that arena should be run every by itself in a tournament versus non-arena. But yeah. Anyways, that's just kind of my opinion, I guess, and I think it kind of makes for a fun, diverse tournament where because I think, and especially even though a lot of people's opinions aren't based on a whole lot of games or testing, it's just kind of what they see or have an idea about what their faction or what their team, how it does well in different types of terrain. It kind of just takes that away. In terms of a criticism of a tournament, if you only ever ran arena or you ran non-arena, whether it's actually balanced or not, some people might perceive non-arena to be better for Tau or arena to be better for a melee-based team or something like that. So I think combining those, even if the end result is the same, is psychologically, it feels more fun and fair and balanced and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. I like the idea of forcing players to push themselves to adapt to many different situations in the same tournament. I think that's the way tournaments should be in
Yeah,
general. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, in terms of designing these rules packs for Nova and doing all rules, FAQs, and all that kind of stuff, I just want the game to be fair and fun and balanced for everyone. Like, I don't have a whole lot of personal, what am I trying to say? Inflexibility in any
Sure.
area in terms of, trying to only stick to one format or one thing. I kind of just want everyone to have fun and be happy and feel like it's a fair and balanced game that they can put their competitive effort and energy into and feel like that was like a worthwhile thing to do, basically.
Yeah. No, I like to imagine that's what any peoples that put out a tournament pack, that's what they're trying to do, create something fun that people want to do again and again.
Yeah,
Certainly, if anybody listens to a lot of kind of 40k podcasts, they typically will bring a tournament guy on, and they all of the tournament creators and hosts say, we don't make any money off this tournament because it costs
yeah,
so much to run one. You're doing it because you love the game and you love the
yeah,
atmosphere, the community,
yeah,
not for money. Even though people have to pay to get in, you're not making
yeah.
money. Yeah.
And yeah, and I found that when I went to LVO and was looking at the tickets for Adepticon and Nova, like the ticket prices sometimes seem really high for what you're doing, and the crazy thing is even with those ticket prices, from everything I've heard from talking to people at these various events, they basically would not they would lose money if they didn't have vendors and other businesses renting the space at these big tournaments and things like that. So yeah, it's pretty crazy that they're able to actually financially exist in a way, because because of the amount of physical space that it takes to play a 40k or kill team tournament. It's hard to make that use of that space financially work
And
for a
talking
tournament,
about
essentially.
adverts, that brings me to my advert for miniature. No, I don't have an advert.
Yeah,
Okay, no, yeah, I agree. It's a tough business to try and make a hobby out of a business in, I guess.
yeah.
Um, so I feel like
Right.
we've, yeah,
So I'm trying to think of
go.
other
Okay, yeah,
things going forward that I can talk about.
sure.
So right. So essentially, going forward from my experience with BAO and learning more about the Ultima missions and all that kind of stuff, and some people have their various opinions on these things, but I'm just sort of telling you my take on it right now, which could change at some point in the future, whether leading up to or after Nova or whatever. But right now, I think the Ultima missions with 6 predetermined set secondary objectives, but with the actual measurements for the deployment zones and the primary objectives being the same as the Ultima missions from the book, but with the measurements on the actual map, is probably the best way to go forward as of right now that I can tell.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's good. I mean,
and I know
I'll
we
ask that
were
as a,
also
yeah.
we were also talking about 100 points versus 125
Yeah,
versus
yeah,
135.
yeah.
And again, it's tricky because I know that a lot of tournaments are running it that way, and a lot of people have their various, like, I really like this point value and all that kind of stuff. But for the bigger tournaments, when you're trying to come up with point values that is fair for everyone, and you know that 100 points has been tested and the point values for the models have specifically been created for that set point value, it's you have to have. I think you have to have a pretty good reason, but that good reason can be it's so everyone can play more awesome models
It's
and
more
so that
fun.
kind of stuff. But I think exactly,
That's a reason.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I think those are totally legitimate and great reasons. But I think the reason that, oh, it's more fair for this team, or it's more fair because they get to use this, or it's more balanced in some way, I think those arguments for or reasonings for using those point values shouldn't necessarily be the primary way of going about it.
Well, to throw a bone of contention out there, I suppose. I mean, we have tournaments,
Yeah.
and up until elites, they have pretty much all just been 100 points in arena, out of arena, whatever. So we
Yeah.
do have some data to work with, not a huge amount, admittedly, but some. And
Yeah.
it's pretty, I feel, pretty obvious that
Yeah.
Tyranid and Death Guard are top tier, right? Okay, you're not going to commit to
You're
that.
saying
Okay,
with the competitive play missions in the arena book,
sure,
but
yeah.
not the Ultima missions.
I'm just saying in general, in the tournaments that have occurred, whatever packs they were using, I assume they would have been using Annihilation in general.
Oh, okay, like
But
an
yeah,
Adepticon and stuff like that.
sure, Adepticon, Warhammer
Yeah.
World, Nova LVO, etc.
Yeah.
Those teams have placed very highly in all of the
Yes.
missions so far,
Yeah.
or
And that
tournaments.
definitely influenced the decisions that I made around the BAO pack and
Exactly,
everything.
yeah.
And I found that those teams didn't do as well. It was small sample sizes, but they the changes that we made to help elite teams seemed to work, at least. And that's what I'm saying is, like, going through that and then seeing the Ultima missions in the way that they work, I feel like they will help that even more, in the sense that I think elite teams will actually do better with using those missions.
Okay, fair enough. This is the point. Where are we? How far in are we? Let's have a look. An hour and 23. This is the point where I have to say I haven't played an Ultimate mission.
I know, and a lot
Okay,
of people haven't, and
yeah.
I only relatively recently discovered them, and that's what I was saying before, how I think that's kind of an unfortunate communication
Breakdown.
breakdown
Breakdown, yeah.
from Games Workshop about how those missions could be incorporated by people, and and how much effort and testing might have gone into them, and for them not to get the amount of publicity that they should have gotten in the first place, because they were actually tested and designed to work with tournaments and all that kind of stuff.
Well, okay, but counterpoint, Games Workshop, and this is why I never played one, because the Games
Yeah.
Workshop tournament packet for Arena was not Ultima. It was the other 4 missions that you get in it.
Right.
They ran their own
Which is
tournament and
which
didn't
is
play Ultima.
I know. and I think that's a problem.
I I think it might be, but if we talk about it for too much, I'm gonna slag GW off too much. So yes, I think GW has a few communication issues. Yeah. Uh, but okay. So that's
But
kind of your what's that?
yeah, well, yeah, and I was going to say, aside from that communication issue, from what I can tell, the Ultimate missions seem good and balanced. I know I've repeated myself about that a lot, but I've been playing specifically just those missions and literally trying to come up with the craziest, weird scenarios that would feel as imbalanced as possible, which definitely would have using my BAO pack or the Nova Annihilation pack if we'd run those scenarios. But in these ones, it didn't seem that way, which was cool. And that's totally what flipped my perception of them, in that until you actually try them, it's hard to tell how they work.
Okay.
Basically.
Well, you know what? I want to play them. Next time I
Yeah.
go, I'll actually take my arena book and play an Ultimate mission.
Yeah.
But I'm going to play it at
But
125, and there's nothing you could do to stop me.
I do I do recommend actually picking 6 of the secondary objectives from the arena book that you feel are somewhat fair for different types of teams. Like, if the 3 were, let's say, engage in all fronts, scout the field, and proximity alert, then you definitely want to give the non-horde
Oh, okay,
teams,
sure.
a
mix of movement and melee objectives kind of thing. Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
or something
okay.
like that. Yeah,
Makes sense.
and
Makes sense.
because, or I mean, in the book it says roll them randomly, and this is another cool thing about your Discord and having feedback from people. And I think Michael Holy was saying that he has played the Ultimate missions with the random objectives, and he said he has run into scenarios where it felt like the 6 random objectives that were generated did favor certain types of teams over
Well,
others.
yeah, I mean, if you're randomly rolling, there are clearly objectives
Right.
in there that are not for your
Yeah.
team. Yeah, makes
Right.
sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, a quick question about BAO itself.
Yeah.
While you were there, obviously this was 100 points. It was alternating between arena and open. But
Yeah.
did you? And there wasn't every single faction represented, and small sample size. But were there any that you felt kind of excelled?
Sorry. What?
Were
Excel?
there any factions that you felt really excelled over any others? Any that had a particularly tough time? And if possible, remove player skill from the equation, which I realize is a tough one. But yeah,
Is nearly impossible. You'd be like, so
yeah.
in could we, like, if we said that if Michael was playing someone else's list that they brought to BAO, would he have done as well with that list type thing,
uh,
or would he have done better? It's really tough
It is tough to
to
say. So obviously
micro.
Michael Holy won both days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Although the second day was really interesting
He got a
because
loss.
Shane Watts,
Yes.
who is actually the number 1 ranked Custodes player on the ITC for regular 40K, decided to play
Interesting.
Kill Team that morning. He actually sent me an email that morning saying, "Hey, is there any spots open in Kill Team?" Because I don't know if he had been knocked out of the top 8 of BAO or something like that in regular 40K. And he went and just bought from the secondhand store that Frontline had there. He bought his team of 3, I think it was 3 or 4
Raveners.
Raveners
Yeah,
and
yeah,
two warriors and just a couple of gaunts. And so it was like
yeah,
a 7 model Tyranid
yeah,
team.
yeah.
And he was the only player to beat Muggle Holy in the whole weekend.
That was
And
exceptionally funny for me and Birinid because at the time we were recording an interview as they were playing that game, and like
okay,
we left your channel while you were
yeah,
streaming it just as it
yeah.
began, I think. And then in that interview, he says Raveners are a trap and we shouldn't use Raveners. And then we come back to, oh, a three Ravender
One of
team's
the best.
beaten the best player in Kill Team. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm not editing that out, Pyramid. Sorry. But yeah, that was quite funny.
Yeah, and then right after that, because he had beaten Michael, he stayed at the top table of the tournament. Um, the Tau player, Oodsickle from your Discord, Eric is his name.
Yeah.
He came and completely crushed Shane's Tyranids with Tau, and it threw the whole tournament. And so then, and essentially, he ended up going into this. I think basically the last round, he ended up being the only undefeated player with Tau, and then Michael ended up beating him in the last round. And because Shane had scored so few points in that game against Eric when he on his Tau, that ended up being the difference, because they were both 4-1 at the end, and Shane had beaten Michael. But so it basically came down to battle points, and because Michael had gotten more points throughout the tournament, he ended up winning again. Basically.
Well, that, and he won in the final, right?
Well, he had a loss going into that game, and so it ended up, I guess 3 of them would have ended up at 4-1.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then it
But
just
in the
came down
final
to
game,
points.
at the highest table, he did win the
Right.
final game. And was it is that an auto win?
No, not necessarily. He
Oh,
could
okay.
he could have still lost if
If he'd
Shane
won the
or
game, he could have still lost.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Battle
because
points.
it was battle points, and the only reason we were using battle points and not having a cut to like a top 4 or a top 8 is actually because Best Coast Pairings doesn't have a good system for doing a top 4 or top 8, and that was actually a problem with the very first Kill Team tournament that I ran that got put onto BCP. The very first one that went on there had 2 really weird little scores, because I did run a cut to a top 4, and then Best Coast Pairings counted that as 2 separate tournaments. One was a 4-player tournament for like 2 rounds, and one was a a regular 10-person tournament with 5 rounds, or 4 or 5 rounds. And as a result of that issue with Best Coast Pairings, we decided to kind of only run the X amount of games with no cut to a top 4, and then just adding up the battle points at the end. I would honestly prefer to have like a cut to a top 4 or top 8, and we're definitely going to be doing that at LVO. It's going to be like the first day is probably going to be 5 or 6 rounds, and then it'll be a cut to a top 8 probably for the second day.
I don't mind using battle points for almost everything, except I feel that if you win on the top table in the final game, it should automatically be a win regardless of battle points, And then battle points can figure the rest of it out. But it should be, yeah. But whatever. That's a hot contentious issue that I'm not gonna. I'm not making a big case about anything. I just feel
but
like,
also the way that the pairings work, if you were really just purely going by battle points, that wouldn't necessarily, even though it was on the stream and it's technically table 1 in the app, it's not necessarily the top table unless the 2 players with the most points are playing against each other. And the way that the pairings work is that it tries to pair people against opponents that they haven't played before, so that you don't end up playing the same people over and over again.
okay.
And so the way that the pairings work, it's kind of the top table because one of the players was undefeated. But the way that it does the pairings isn't necessarily exactly mathematically who the top ranked players are. It does take into account who the players have played before.
Okay,
basically.
fair enough. So I'm hungry, so we're going to power through the next few questions quickly. What are your thoughts on other primary objectives? This is, but slightly crazier. As in, forget hold 1, get 1, hold 2, get 2,
Right.
hold more, get 3.
Yeah.
Like, do you think there's a validity in that? I mean, obviously you'd have to heavily play test to make sure it's actually balanced. And I don't know exactly what I'm suggesting
You
here.
mean different primary objectives?
Yes. Yeah. So it's not
Such as
objective based. Or, well, not
so this
in the standard there are 5 objectives ultimate mission style. You can still use secondaries, you can still use whatever else, but a genuinely different objective.
yeah,
Not a slight
I think
variation,
those are awesome ideas. Like the bonus objectives that I had in BAO were totally like that, in the sense that one of the missions, each player had an objective that they could actually move at the end of the turn, and you kind of had to essentially get that objective across the battlefield and score a touchdown with it, like a relic kind of thing.
Yeah.
And everyone seemed to like that objective. Unfortunately, I needed to word it better, and some people thought that maybe you couldn't actually score it in the 4 turns because the distance it moved, and there were some tweaks that needed to be done to it. But yeah, I think all of those types of unique, different types of primary objectives can be awesome. Yeah.
Okay. I
mean,
agree. Yeah.
but at the same time, if it, I think the conversation needs to be around making the game more fun or more
Sure.
interesting or exciting, or but I think anytime we start talking about, we're putting this in to make it more fair or balanced, that doesn't really work when you know that the certain aspect of it has literally been designed and tested, especially with the points of the models and the weapons and all that kind of stuff, to work with very specific missions and very specific objectives and all that kind of stuff.
But by that logic, again, you're saying that going to 1 to 5 is inherently unbalanced, right?
Um,
I mean, we
no,
can
not
play back what
necessarily
you just
inherently
said. That's
unbalanced.
what
I
you
would
said.
say inherently less balanced than the way that
Okay.
they were tested for.
So if it's already less balanced at the points
Right.
cost that people already are saying in general that they enjoy more,
Right.
why not try and rebalance?
And I'll tell you exactly why.
Okay, hit me.
Because I know that, and I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, you are of the opinion that changing the point values of models and gear and war gear and things like that is not a good idea.
Ooh,
Because if we're
yeah,
talking about changing
yeah.
things to
I'm
try and make it more balanced, certain other
so
things might need to be changed as well.
I
And then I know you're
consider
getting into
core
tricky
mechanics
territory there.
and the points in the books things that shouldn't be touched if you can avoid it.
Right.
Whereas objectives, everything else, like the
Right.
mission itself can be changed, and
Right.
the community is kind of okay with that. They're like, oh, well, it's a different tournament pack, that's cool.
Yeah.
But if you say, okay, so we're playing this different tournament pack, oh, and here's an entire different list of points for all of your models. I feel like that's a step too far, and you may as well, it's like playing a different game
Yeah.
almost. If you've said, well, we've added
Right.
6 points to racks because
Yeah.
they're really strong, and then
Yeah.
we've removed their invulnerable save, and it's like, whoa, hold on,
Right.
what?
So basically what
Yeah.
you're saying is, if we can assume that Mike Brand and Games Workshop are telling us the truth, that the points were modified specifically for 100 points and designed for 100 points, if we want to use 125, 135, or 150 points, but we're not going to change the point values of the models themselves or the war gear, and you're saying that the best way, or that one way to go about trying to balance this new point value, and this is assuming that we have some kind of testing or big tournaments and things like that, that the things that can be changed to make that more balanced are the missions and the secondary objectives and things like that. And it's not unheard of that could work. I think it does take a certain amount of work and and testing to accomplish that. But is that what you're saying? Basically, that's the only area, even though the points were set specifically for 100 points, we're assuming that that's the case. that's totally up to the individual to decide that. But if that's the assumption, and we're moving to a higher point values, and we want to try and make that work equally well and be equally as fair, and yet without touching the point values of the models, only do it with the missions and the secondary objectives and the primary objectives, that kind of
Correct. Stuff. That is my claim, my bold statement. Why am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I think.
I thought that's what you were building up to. Oh, okay. I thought you were going to tell me why that was wrong.
I think it could totally be done. I just think it takes more work and time and testing and things that maybe I don't know. Maybe some people have the ability to do that, but in terms of planning tournaments and sort of all the other things that go into planning a tournament, also having to kind of do a whole ton of testing to make sure that it's fair for a new point values, using point values for models that can't be changed. I think that's difficult, but definitely not impossible. I just think it's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, to try and make something truly balanced, I agree, if we were going from scratch, but I struggle to believe that 125 was never tested in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah.
I don't know. Well, no, and the thing is it honestly, if you look at the point cutoffs that they have for, say, road trader, commanders, and all that kind of stuff, like 125, 150, 200. This is totally my opinion. I have no idea if this is correct or not, but it looks to be like those numbers were just chosen arbitrarily, honestly. Like, it was like, this is an easy round number that says, okay, most of the teams will be adding one extra model, or for commanders, they'll be adding these dudes. So let's just pick this easy point value and go with that. And
so I agree that, I'm sure they tested the game, but I don't think they tested the game to the point of, well, actually, we tested it and we found that the absolute best, most perfect game was 106 points. But we rounded it down to 100 because that was easier. Let's be honest, they didn't test it to that level. And I'm sure there was a degree of, 200. Yeah, that's fine. I still...
and the original, so the original point values were obviously picked because they were nice round numbers. But then the actual modifications that they made to the cost of everything, that was done from the actual testing that their various testing groups did, whether it was the Frontline Gaming guys or Nova guys or whatever. And they only tested 100 points, as far as I know.
So I can believe that, but then I think it's entirely valid to just say, you know what, I totally accept that 100 points was where it was tested, where it was balanced.
Yeah.
But I'm having more fun at 125, and I want to play a balanced 125. I don't think that's a crazy thing to say. And it's great for, Mike Brandt to come out and say, well, look, it's not balanced at 125. So that's why I'm staying at 100. That's awesome. But it's like, okay, well, it's not as fun, though. So,
but the question is, when you say it's not as fun, are you talking about just because you can't use what I'm going to say is I actually agree with you.
I know what you're going to say, yeah.
That we want to use the cool team makeups and models that we want to use for various factions and things with the awesome, battle suits or, Chaos Terminators and all that kind of stuff. And if we are talking about a competitive tournament and people are looking at, the best, most efficient makeup of teams that they can make, and those don't necessarily fit into them, then I can totally see why we'd want to, play a higher point values. Now, that's also still going off the kind of past idea that the missions that we were running did favor Horde teams. And I'm starting to really feel like the Ultimate missions are going to be better for teams like Custodes and the smaller, more elite teams, just from what I've seen when running them. But in a very small sample size, and that could change totally. But and yeah, I wouldn't be advocating for making that change or changing that in my rules pack and everything if if I wasn't really like feeling strongly that it was going to be more fun and balanced for everybody. Really, especially where the I know you were saying you haven't really tried them yet, but where the deployment zones and the objectives are and everything, it creates some really interesting, fun kind of interactions that happen in terms of like a whole bunch of models just like going for one objective, or you're forced to. I know every mission kind of has this aspect to it, but the one thing that I found there wasn't a whole lot of with those missions was, and I think this was one of the negatives of my BAO pack, and probably the original Nova Annihilation pack as well, that there were definitely objectives where you just wanted to sit a guy on this objective off in the corner for the entire game, and if you just had extra models to do that with, you just got those free victory points because you had more models. And from what I've seen with the Ultima missions, even with Custodes, it makes it less likely that would happen, basically.
Okay. Fair enough. Yep, I haven't played it. I can't say anything.
That's the two things that a horde team has advantage over a non-horde team, is that they have extra models that they can send off to do hold objectives, or just crowd one objective and hold it and things like that. But if you, from my experience, it doesn't necessarily always benefit a horde team in that way.
Okay.
With those missions.
I'll be honest, I haven't played against a super horde team and found it impossible to win.
Right.
But generally, what other people say, like my experience is anecdotal. I'm generally seeing what other people are saying, and I'm saying, well, okay, I haven't had huge troubles, but they must be correct, right? So I can't really give a solid example and say, oh, well, actually, Alex, I haven't had huge troubles with the armies I've played. But generally, I am still under the impression that hordes are dominating because of objective-based gameplay. But you are saying that even though it is objective-based gameplay, they are not dominating.
Not from the attempting to make it as extreme as possible in favor of hordes, specifically with those missions. I found it wasn't as lopsided as it was with the Nova missions or my BAO missions.
Well, the 19 Hormagaunts I've just built will be sad. It's a shame. Okay, no, fair enough. I'm excited to play some Ultima, and I might play tomorrow. So if I do, I think you'd be. I
basically just found them really fun. Honestly, that was like the main thing. I was hoping that they might be, balanced or whatever, but it was more that the games, not only were they balanced, but they were actually more fun even than the other arena missions that are earlier in the book, I found.
Okay.
And I tried them on both non-arena and arena setups as well.
Awesome. I will definitely take a look at those. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time. Because I'm hungry, to be clear. No other reason. Did you have anything else you wanted to say or plug or anything like that? Or any big takeaways or questions you wanted me to ask that I haven't, or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I think I don't know if it's. I find that when I talk about the secondary objectives and the changing of the missions and all that kind of stuff, a lot of the feedback that I get from people is saying, oh, you shouldn't do it this way, or this way sucks, or whatever. And I think specifically as a TO for LVO and all that kind of stuff, I just want people to know that I'm not set in. None of it's like rock solid, never going to change ideas, because I'm always just trying to make it fair and better for everybody. And also while working within the the kind of the limitation of also needing or wanting to collaborate with the other TOs, Adepticon, Nova, SoCal, and all that kind of stuff, so that we can come up with some sort of a unified format that everyone can use and everyone is happy using. And so I think even my own opinion, whatever, might have to change in order to accommodate other tournament organizers' ideas and things, just so that it can be one format, even if it's not my favorite format or Sheldon's favorite format or whatever. As long as it's the same for everybody, I think then so the thing is if we can get to that point where we have one format that everyone's using, then changes that we make will be instantly used in all the other tournaments, because we'll have already agreed that, okay, this is the format that everyone's going to use. It works for everybody. And then if we make changes to it with the collaboration of all of the other TOs, then those changes will work for everybody. That makes sense?
Yeah, sure, sure. I guess one final question for you is, obviously a tournament pack is generally missions, right? Missions and objectives.
Yeah.
That's what you're changing, and you're defining the points value.
And having an FAQ as well.
Yes, that's very important. Yes.
And the sun is going down, so
I see that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because I'm trying to use natural sunlight, and there's clouds going over.
No, I've got a light. I've got a light. Yeah.
The camera is having an issue with it a little bit.
Yes. We're almost done, so it's fine. What are your thoughts on changing a core rule? Like a core, not necessarily mechanic, but a core rule that isn't ambiguous, but you feel, not just you, but where do you feel you have to be as a TO, as a community, to finally say, you know what, this one thing is genuinely not balanced, so we are going to a ban list, something like that, whatever. We are going to say, if you come to this BAO tournament, you cannot use whatever, a model under 5 points. Who knows? That's a crazy idea, not that, to be clear. But yeah.
I'm not really into restricting people too much in terms of what models they can use. And so I think some of the other TOs and stuff disagree with me on that because of, what they feel is balanced or not. But I think just allowing people to use everything that's available is the most enjoyable way to go about it. Now, I mean, I also think that there isn't really, we are not really at the point yet, I think, where we need to make balance changes particularly. We need to just figure out what works at all that everyone can use for tournaments, because we still haven't gotten to that point yet, unfortunately. And then once everyone's using the same missions and everyone's using, or at least similar missions, then, you can see, okay, this team, for example, if we were still using the Nova missions, I would definitely be looking to make changes, just kind of what I did for BAO, because you see that Tyranids dominated various tournaments at, in the UK and then, Poxwalkers at Adepticon. And if we were still only using that mission set, I would definitely look to make some kind of change. And that was part of my motivation to actually allow all 18 secondary objectives, actually, was to help non-horde teams, which seemed on a small scale to work a bit, at least. But preemptively, I'm not a huge fan of preemptively trying to make balance changes without seeing some sort of results or something that has caused that. And because we literally haven't a tournament that used these ultimate missions or anything yet, I think it's a little too soon to make any changes around that. Or we haven't even seen a big tournament that uses 150 or 120 points or whatever. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's hard I'm not a huge fan of trying to make preemptive changes based on my theories or whatever, unless I have some sort of actual feedback from people or from tournaments, where you actually see how it plays out in action.
Yeah, no, I understand. I'm the same way. Without real data,
Yeah,
anecdotes don't mean anything
yeah,
as far as I'm
yeah.
concerned. Except I will add, it is community driven, and if you
Hmm.
start a tournament and you sell
Yeah,
10 tickets and all 10 people say we don't like this
yeah,
rule, it's like, "Well,
yeah.
all right, cool, let's take that
Exactly.
rule away." Like
Yeah,
it's a scale, you know. If yeah,
yeah.
I do think, genuinely.
Yeah, for certain small rules that might seem ambiguous or whatever, um, having 10 just 10 people, a small tournament of 10 people can definitely tell you if a certain rule works or not, or if it's worded incorrectly or something like
Oh well, no, I mean at any scale. I just mean it scales to your tournament. If you run 128 people and you give them all a flyer or a questionnaire,
that. Yeah.
and one of the questions is, do you like this rule? And they all tick no,
Yeah.
take that rule out.
Yeah.
Is what I would say. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's my final thing. I don't think there was really a point to me saying that. We're just chatting. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, uh, do you have anything you want to plug before we go?
I would say just keep an eye out for the Nova packet and the LVO packet and the FAQ that I know Kill Team Stream, who's running the SoCal, or Sheldon, who's running the SoCal Open Frontline Gaming, is working on an FAQ that essentially takes a lot of the ambiguous rules that haven't been in an actual FAQ, or even rules that maybe Games Workshop doesn't feel require an FAQ, but that we've had a lot of questions about just to clarify it. I think that's definitely something going forward that we're going to have to include with the the mission packs and things like that. And I think
Yes,
that'll make it a
definitely.
lot easier for people to practice and test things. But they'll say, "No, I know exactly how this rule is being run at this tournament." And yeah, because I don't think I didn't really have one for BAO and didn't have one for LVO. Maybe a small one for LVO, but I think the next one would be much bigger and more in depth. And I would guess that the FAQ would come out before SoCal for Kill Team.
God, I hope so.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, yeah, no, I've had a read over, and you know what? Like I say, I don't care which way people rule these rules. I just want to know which way they are ruled for the tournament.
yeah,
I don't care which way you go with it. Just give me a
yeah.
rule. Yeah.
And I'll be honest, that rule that you guys told me about, the prime reanimation protocols that you asked the guys from Games Workshop about, that it blew my mind, not because of the actual ruling that they chose, but because it was like a rules as intended, that they, like, exactly like you said, that it was not how it's actually written and not how it's worded, but that's how that they meant you to play it.
Yeah. Let's not get into that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming along, Alex. It's been a good chat. It's been hopefully some people that are interested in maybe their own tournaments or going to tournaments can get a little bit of insight from this.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
Oh,
anyway,
and actually,
yes.
if people have questions about LVO, BAO, any of the tournament stuff and want feedback or have questions, they can actually email me at uh, killteamacademy@gmail.com.
Okay, killteamacademy@gmail.com. Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming along. And thank you, everybody, for watching this 2 hours almost exactly interview about tournaments, competitiveness within Kill Team, the community, and what we should be doing and looking forwards to going forwards. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks for chatting.